important is DNA evidence in this? I notice his attorney is saying, no, we don't want to do this cheek swab. But from your perspective, how important is DNA evidence here?
Humongous. It puts him on his head.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear the thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime.
Pop quiz, hotshot.
What is the smoking gun evidence in this case? What is the number one piece of evidence in this case? Well, the latest news in the Long Island serial killer case is that a judge has sided with the prosecutors ordering Heuermann to give up a sample of his DNA. Judge Timothy Mazzei wrote, "The court finds that contrary to the defendant's contentions, there is probable cause to believe that the defendant committed the crimes charged and therefore a basis to compel the buccal swab." He further wrote that, quote, "The court finds that a comparison of the defendant's sample with the evidence obtained, and that includes a hair found on a victim he's accused of killing." We're going to be talking about it. We'll be talking about that in a moment. And the DNA on a pizza crust and napkin will yield probative, in other words, valuable material evidence, whether it is inculpatory or not. In other words, what he's saying is it's important for them to ascertain whether there is a match or not. It's either going to be inculpatory or it's not going to be. If there is a smoking gun in this case, if there is a number one clue, the cops didn't miss. It looks like it was a hair, not from Heuermann's wife, but from Heuermann himself, found at the bottom of a burlap sack used to wrap and dispose of one of the victims. More specifically, it's not the hair, it's the DNA on the hair that is the smoking gun potentially in this case. This raises the question, is this a DNA case? Is DNA alone enough to convict Heuermann? Let me know in the comments. Before we get to the rest of this episode, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Bear in mind, I'm going to be doing a follow-up on the Long Island serial killer case dealing with the 11th victim. Do you know who that is? I'll be dealing with that in a follow-up. If you're enjoying this episode, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button. And let's get started. So a major break in this long-running investigation occurred, according to 9 News, in January, right? January, when investigators recovered Heuermann's DNA from a pizza crust that was thrown away in a Manhattan trash can. And I was sort of walking around that part of Manhattan, 3 months later, and then again a month after that. The DNA breakthrough can only be a major break. In other words, that pizza crust evidence can only be a big breakthrough if they had an original sample from the crime scene. Can you see that? Taken from one of the victims and then matched it with the pizza sample. Now, if you ask me, formally requesting a DNA sample, well, isn't that being done to cross the necessary legal T's and dot the legal I's, right? Isn't it just really kind of a legal formality? And I'll explain what I mean by that in a moment. Because I also think it's interesting the defense objected to this. You'd think if there wasn't a match and the suspect knew there wouldn't be a match, right, or that there couldn't be a match, then they'd be keen to exonerate their client. According to 9 News, quote, "That DNA matched DNA from a male hair from the bottom of a burlap sack that the killer used to wrap one of the victim's bodies," according to prosecutors, meaning the DNA from the pizza crust matched DNA from a male hair from the bottom of a burlap sack. And it's possible that that hair didn't get to the bottom of the burlap sack during the commission of the crime. It could have occurred during some other activity such as hunting, when the suspect wasn't as focused on his leaving behind evidence. Does that make sense? Now, this is where it kind of does make a lot more sense, the whole process that is underway. Authorities already have DNA samples from the suspect's wife. I think that should be ex-wife, Asa Ellerup. And those samples were collected from bottles inside a trash can outside the couple's shared home and were linked through mitochondrial DNA testing to hairs found on or near 3 of the slain victims. So the same question applies there. Would they also request formally a sample from his wife and perhaps other people as well, because they've already got the DNA through the disposal DNA found in the garbage? Are they now going to cross those legal I's and T's by formally requesting the DNA from, for example, his wife? Now, in a serial killer case, this is a very interesting aspect in the legal sense. You can imagine how it's tempting for cops and prosecutors to be guilty of overreach, to say, we've caught this guy and he's guilty of whatever, a dozen crimes. And let's say even he's also guilty, or he's guilty of the murder of Shannon Gilbert. Well, if you make a mistake and he's able to prove and poke holes in your theory, well, then you can lose the entire case. And when you're dealing with a serial killer, you've got to be extra careful that you don't do that. And even though there may be more victims and there's a lot more, it's a lot more high profile and not a lot more riding on it, one's actually got to be doubly careful, not the opposite. And so you can see how, trying to get a guilty verdict based on a pile of dead bodies, you still got to prove a link to those bodies. And it's easier to prove a link to a single body or 2 bodies, right? And so what you want to do is only bring charges when you can show that there are definitive links. Does that make sense? So what you want to do is prosecute modestly, and what that means is show probable cause within a sort of a limited area. And that is what they've done. They've been sure about 3 victims, and they are, suspicious of a 4th. And so the way to prosecute and investigate a serial killing scenario is treat it like the murder of one person, and then go through the evidence step by step and the evidence from each victim one by one. And then you can start talking about patterns and that sort of thing. What's also interesting is that since his arrest, his family have apparently consented to giving buccal swabs. According to the article, quote, notably, the judge's order states that buccal swabs were previously obtained from Heuermann's wife and 2 children upon consent for further DNA analysis. So you can see, in the same way that the cops first got disposal DNA, is that the right term? They now want to more formally show that the DNA is in fact from Heuermann, just as they've done with his family. Going back to the article, on Tuesday, Suffolk County Sheriff Errol Toulon told CNN's Erin Burnett that obtaining DNA is extremely important to this case, adding that he's got no doubt that Heuermann killed the 3 women he is accused of murdering, end quote. So what do you think? Is this a DNA case? If you threw out the DNA, do you think Heuermann could still be found guilty? Conversely, if you only had DNA and no phone data and nothing else really, do you think that would be sufficient for a conviction? I'd be interested to hear your answers. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.